Hello, welcome to this lesson on an introduction to classroom management. This is the first part of a two-part series. We'll be looking at some foundational principles, we'll be looking at some positive things you can do, and then in our next segment we will deal with the issues of rules and consequences and some things that you should avoid doing. But first, we're going to look at some foundational principles for classroom management. This is especially important for us as Christians because we want to approach this from a distinctively Christian perspective. There are many different approaches to classroom management and to discipline in general, and we want to be sure that we are following scriptural principles. So here are some things we need to keep in mind. First, we must always remember that God is the Lord. So we submit to Him and to His Word. He is our ultimate authority, and we must always point our students to Him. Whatever we do, whatever standards we have, whatever things we're going to enforce in our classroom, however we're going to treat our students, must always be done with the view to the Lordship of God, that He is the one who is our authority. We also point our students to Him as the Lord. So we want to be sure that they understand that, for example, if they obey us, they're obeying the Lord. If they disobey us, they're disobeying the Lord. That He is the one that they must be most concerned about. Our second foundational principle is that man is created in the image of God. This has a lot of implications for the issue of classroom management and child discipline. There are a few particular aspects of it that come to the fore. First, man is a responsible being. This is part of being created in the image of God. Man makes responsible choices. He chooses what he's going to do. He is not an animal who just responds by reaction or by training. He's not to be treated that way. Instead, man makes choices, rational choices, based on what he wants to do. So our students are like this. They are making choices about their behavior. They're not just reacting. It's not a stimulus response type of approach. It's not a behavior modification idea that, well, we just provide the right stimulus and the students respond in a certain way. Instead, we treat our students as responsible beings. Another aspect of the image of God is that man was created to exercise dominion. We see this in Genesis 1 and 2. That he was to have control. He was to have dominion over the earth under God. Now, what happens in our discipline of children is that they too, because they're created in the image of God, they have an innate desire to have dominion. They want to rule. They want to make choices. They want to control. Now, obviously, we can think of times when this is bad, when this is a problem, that they want to control things. But we have to realize that it's a God-given urge that they have as they're created in His image. So the desire for control, the desire to make choices is a good thing when it's channeled properly. And we'll be talking about ways that they can make choices, ways to control
different aspects without placing them in charge of the classroom, for example, and teaching them the right way to have dominion. Another aspect of man being created in the image of God is that he is a rational being. We might not think our students are rational. There are times when they seem to be irrational, but they are acting out of a process of thought. That process might be warped. It might be perverted. It might be muddled, but there is a process of thinking going on when they act. Again, they are not just doing mindless behavior modification. That's not the approach we take. We treat them as rational beings who can think and who can reason through issues. So those are some aspects of man being created in the image of God that apply to the area of classroom management. Now, another important aspect is that man is a sinner. We see this in Genesis 3, and this is man's nature ever since the fall. It comes from within, and so our students will misbehave. This is part of particular sin was
classroom, and they will say, I thought this was a Christian school. That shouldn't happen here.
Well, I can agree with them that it shouldn't happen here, but the point is that our students are sinners. Our teachers are sinners. And there's a lot of sin floating around here, and so there is going to be misbehavior. We shouldn't be surprised by it. We also have to recognize that all the rules and punishments in the world won't change that. You see, we cannot look to the law, to rules, to do what only grace can do, which is change the heart. We'll be talking about this some more in some other sessions, but the point here is that you do have to have rules. I'm not denying that. But sometimes as teachers we think, okay, if I have a behavior problem in my class, then I need to make a rule for it, or I need to change the rules to try to keep that from happening. We are not going to keep all misbehavior from happening. We'll talk about some things we can do that help prevent it, but the fact is, because our students and we are sinners, there is going to be problems. Our sinful students need a heart transplant, so don't just think that adding rules is going to solve the problem. But remember what will solve the problem. See, Christ came to redeem us from sin. And so we can have a new heart. We can point our students to the fact of a new heart and can point to hope, because Christ through the Holy Spirit can bring about real change in our lives, that we can overcome our sin nature. Remember too that sanctification is a process, not an event. Sanctification is where we become more and more holy, where we become more and more like Christ. Well, this is a process. It's a lifelong process. Don't look for immediate, permanent change in your students. You're going to have to deal with some problems repeatedly. You may have the same student doing the same thing over and over again. You need to deal with this, but the thing is, don't be surprised by it. I mean, think about your own Christian life. There are sins that you and I struggle with over and over, and we look back and we say, why am I doing that again? What happened? I know that's wrong. What did I do wrong? Why did I fall into that same sin again? Well, it's because we still have a sin nature, and that will not be eradicated until we go to glory. So on this side of glory, we are going to have to deal with these issues. Your students are going to deal with them. Be patient with them. You do have to address the problems. I'm not saying to excuse them, but you need to have an attitude to realize when the student does the same thing many times, that is going to happen. And don't be surprised by it. Here's a phrase that may be helpful as well. We're here to manage the classroom and disciple the student. You see, management implies control. When you manage something, you've set up structures so that it operates smoothly. You can control how your classroom operates. You can control procedures, and we'll be talking about procedures in our next session. You can control these things. You cannot control or manage the student. In the same way, the student needs to be discipled. He needs to be taught. He needs to be trained. He needs to be pointed to the Word of God. He needs to be pointed to reliance upon the Holy Spirit. Discipling is the way we deal with our students. We manage our classroom. If you keep this in mind, it will help you to avoid falling into some particular problems. Now, as a new teacher particularly, you might be thinking, well, when should I do this? When should I think about these things? You might think, okay, let me see how school begins, and then I'll see how I need to deal with things. The problem is, you think about other areas of life. You don't build your football team on game day. You don't go out to dig a well when you feel thirsty. You don't wait to discuss procedures when an emergency has begun. In schools, that's why you have fire drills. You do them before the emergency comes so you know what to do. And all these things you prepare ahead of time. You think about what you're going to do in certain situations. Being a teacher and thinking about classroom management is the same thing. You need to prepare ahead of time.
You need to think about what you're going to do. Now, as a new teacher particularly, things are going to happen and you're not going to know all that might happen in advance. More experienced teachers can say, yes, I've seen it all. Well, even they have not seen it all. There are going to be things that happen. There are going to be situations that come up that they are not ready for. But you do need to prepare as much as you can. Again, think about the football game. If you're a coach of a football team, you study game films, you know what the other team is likely to do, you see what plays they have run when they line up in certain formations, so you're ready for that. Now, of course, they may do something different when the game happens, and so you have to be ready to respond to that. But you don't go into it and say, well, I don't know in detail what they're going to do, so I'm not going to prepare at all. No, you prepare the best you can, and then you're able to deal with the exceptions when they come up. So think about these things ahead of time, before the first day of class. Think about them well in advance so that you let them mull over in your mind. Now, one of the most important things about classroom management are the positive things that we do to help prevent classroom management problems. Here's an excellent quotation. Effective teachers manage their classrooms. Ineffective teachers discipline their classrooms. And in the context of this quotation, they're using discipline in the sense of punishment. That is, effective teachers have procedures and things in place to help prevent discipline problems. Ineffective teachers are reactive. A problem pops up and they have to deal with it. And then another problem pops up. They have to deal with that. There are firemen rushing from one fire to another. But instead, you want to prevent fires from starting to begin with. Now, you can't stop all fires. You know things are going to happen, but you want to do things to try to prevent them. So the same way in the classroom. You can take positive steps. You can avoid many problems. Not all. Again, remember, our students are sinners. They're going to make responsible choices for their actions. So you're not going to prevent everything, but these are some things that will help avoid many problems. First, plan for engaged learning. Engaged learning means the students are active. They are working productively. They're not being passive. If they're just sitting and listening or sitting and watching, if they're not actively involved in what they're doing, they're more likely to misbehave. Now, when I say working productively, I'm not talking about just busy work. I'm not talking about just, okay, we'll give them a bunch of worksheets so they have a lot to do. If you want them to be doing something that is actually proceeding towards the goal, and we have other sessions about engaged learning, but the point is that if you are doing things so that the students are active and involved, there's less opportunity for misbehavior. Another positive action, start working immediately when the bell rings. Don't give your class time to get out of line. When you should be ready. When the tardy bell rings, you should be at the front of the classroom, and when the bell rings, immediately start teaching. Don't give any time. Don't wait for anything. Just start right into your lesson or start into the opening activity, whatever it might be. If you wait around, if you're not prepared at the beginning of class, you start losing the students. They start getting into misbehavior, they start talking, then you have to spend time bringing them back in. So start right at the beginning of the bell. Now again, I know that there are times when this might not work. You might have gotten held up in the office. There may be some reason that you're not ready to begin right at the beginning, but that should be your goal. You should plan on starting class right at the bell. Likewise, avoid wasted time during transitions. There are times during your class session, maybe you've been lecturing for 10 or 15 minutes and then you're going to give them a worksheet, you're going to have them do some type of activity. You want that transition from one to another to flow smoothly. You don't want to sit up there and think, okay, I've just lectured, now what comes next? And take a minute or so trying to figure out what's going to happen. If you do this, they're going to start getting out of hand. So you want to move straight from one to another. Again, you can't avoid all of this. Sometimes something unexpected happens. I depend on PowerPoint a lot in my classes, and occasionally the computer will die. And then I have to think, okay, what am I going to do without my PowerPoint? but you want to try to avoid these things. You plan for your class, have your handouts available. When it's time to give them a handout, don't spend time rummaging through your desk or through your files trying to find them. Have them right at hand so that you finish your lesson and then you're able to go right into giving them the handout. Keep your students busy. That's going to avoid many of the classroom problems. Here's a hint. When you're giving an activity for them to keep them from wasting time, when you give them an activity, allow them a little bit less time than is needed for everybody to finish. Keep an eye on them when the first students are getting done, then move ahead with the lesson. If you wait until everybody is done, the faster students will have nothing to do for a few minutes except get in trouble. Now, you can't do this all the time. You do have to be sensitive to students who work slower. But the point is, don't just always wait until everybody is completely done, because what will soon happen is they realize that you're going to give them all the time that they take, and so they'll start working slower. They won't get done quickly. You want to push them ahead so that they work quicker. Another positive action you need to do is monitoring the class. Be aware of what's going on in the class. Don't just bury your head in your notes as you're teaching. Or don't be turned around to the board, talking to the board all the time, or writing notes. You want to be aware of what's happening in the class. This is also called with-itness. That is, you see what's happening, you know what's happening, and you're aware of problems before they begin. Maybe you see two students just giving glances to one another. You don't know what the issue is, you don't know what they're doing, you don't know what they might be thinking, but you can tell just by looking at them that something is up. So you just keep an eye on them, or maybe you walk over near them, as we'll talk about in a minute, but you do something to let them know that you see something going on. So be aware of what's going on in your classroom. Proximity is another positive action. If you walk around the classroom while you're teaching, this is going to help. Just as you're talking, just meander, just wander around various parts of the classroom while you're talking. You don't have to be looking at anything. Just being near the various students is going to prevent a lot of problems. If you see two students talking, whispering to one another, or glancing at one another, or pointing to something, just walk over quietly near them. That will a lot of times just do away with the problem. You don't have to say anything, just walk over and be near them. If you're regularly walking around the class anyway, it won't be attention-getting if you do this. But proximity, being near the students, helps avoid a lot of problems. Set up a work-oriented classroom. Students should realize when they come into class that they are there to work. They're there to be productive. Now, it can be relaxed. It doesn't have to be a slave-driving atmosphere. It can be pleasant, but the idea is they come in and they settle down and they work. This is not a class for joking. It's not a class for goofing off. This is a time when we come in to work. Finally, talk with other teachers. Ask them for hints. Ask them for ideas about classroom management. When you have a problem, if a student does something and you're not sure how to handle it, ask a more experienced teacher for help. We've all had to go through this learning curve. We've all had to deal with issues, and other teachers are glad to help you out. Don't feel like you're going to look like you're ineffective or like you're stupid or like you're failing. All of us have gone through problems. So get help from other teachers. Ask them for suggestions. You have a particular problem student. Ask them, how have you dealt with this student? What is helpful for him? So get ideas from other teachers. Take steps to do that. So this is the end of this first part of our session. In part 2, we're going to be looking at the issues of rules and consequences and establishing procedures in class. We'll also look at some things that you should not do in classroom management. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at this address. I hope this is helpful to you, and I look forward to you viewing the second part of this series.